Welcome to the Tom Nelson podcast. Today, I'm happy to have Martin Durkin here, the director of the 2007 documentary, Great Global Warming Swindle. And Martin, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself to get us started?
I'm a TV producer and documentary maker. I used to I've made lots and lots of science documentaries, I guess, of all the kinds of documentaries, history, science, and so on. I've made mainly science documentaries, and I used to be fairly well known for that. And then foolishly, I accepted the invitation of Channel 4 in 1997 to make a series called Against Nature, which dared to question the truths of the environmental movement. And I did that, and it was like stepping on a landmine. And then even more foolishly, I accepted the invitation from the head of science at Channel 4 in 1997 to make a feature doc on the subject of global warming. And my life changed forever. In a bad way.
What was the reception for the Great Global Warming Swindle?
Well, it was a very quick turnaround, and we thought, no one will even notice this going out. And then it was like the ceiling fell in. At one point, there were huge numbers of a deluge of complaints to this organization called Ofcom, this quasi-government organization that's supposed to take complaints about broadcasting. And the Greens kind of really piled in there. So there were hundreds. I think at the time it was the most complained about program in British broadcasting history or something like that, and it was horrendous. I mean, it was answering all these queries because Channel 4 take Ofcom very seriously, and so to please Channel 4, you've got to take Ofcom very seriously. And Channel 4 even paid, I think, for a barrister about 3 months worth of barrister's time to try and fend off all of the deluge of rubbish that came as a result of that. And I remember being on holiday in the States with my family and getting a call from someone in London saying, "Oh, you're in the Guardian. I was about you in the Guardian." I said, "Whereabouts in the Guardian?" He said, "Oh, the front page." I said, "My God!" I said, "Where on the front page?" He said, "No, it is just the front page." So that was absolutely, and it led to great difficulties after that, getting commissions and so on and so forth. And one's reputation in the industry is, ouch. So it's horrible.
I thought I read somewhere that supportive calls to some station ran 6-1 in favor, 6 in favor for every one against you. That you got a lot of support also, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I've forgotten about that. Yeah, no, there was a lot of that. But of course, when you're fending off Ofcom, you don't feel the support so much. Huge amounts of support. In fact, still, I mean, it's an old film, and I look at it and I cringe now because I do it very differently today. But it's still being sort of recommended to people as viewing, which shows how little there is out there on our side. There's an infinite quantity of global warming nonsense on TV, but there's my little film sort of stuck up there as one of the few bits countering it.
No, as I was saying before, I think it stands up incredibly well, considering it was made in 2007. I just watched it again now. I think it's really a fine piece of work, and it's getting tons of YouTube views, right? It's got a new life for it's people who didn't see it on TV. I think a lot of people have seen it on YouTube, maybe other places.
And then it gets taken down, and then someone puts it up again, and it gets taken down, and someone so it sort of it won't die, much as they'd like to kill it.
How is it getting taken down? What's happening here?
I don't know. It was made a long time ago, so I think that the archive and all that kind of thing, I don't know whether that's still kind of been licensed and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know who's putting it up. I don't know who's taking it down, but it keeps going back up again, I'm pleased to say.
Can you tell us at all about the process of making it, how long it took, and how did you get all those contacts in the scientific community? How did that all happen?
It was a very quick turnaround. Hamish Makura, who's a rather wonderful head of science at Channel 4 at the time, who was himself a geologist, and I think that geologists really tend to be more skeptical because they know the full big story of climate, and said, "Would you do this?" It kind of kicked off at the World Congress of Science, where I used to be on the steering committee of this thing that of science TV makers sort of worldwide. And there was a debate, and I was saying this is all nonsense. And the guy from the BBC attacked me and said, "Oh," and so Hamish thought this was very entertaining, and why not make a film about it? So he asked me to make it, but he said, "You got to make it sort of very quickly." So I rang up John Christie and various other people like that, dived it over to America. I hastily put it together, got a couple of bits wrong in it, which I was really punished for, and then put it out. And I didn't really think that much of it. I didn't realize it was going to be such an absolute stink. And I don't think I didn't fully appreciated all the issues at the time. I'd really like to remake it because I think I underestimated quite the forces that we're up against.
Did you personally travel around yourself to do the filming for that?
Yeah, no, I went around and went to MIT and saw Dick Lindzen and all the others. So met all those guys, and it was Patrick Moore and everyone. And what was lovely was that they were so pleased to see me. They were just, it was kind of, oh my God, someone's actually going to make a film. And they sort of didn't believe quite. I was saying, no, this is going to be a really good skeptic film. And they just sort of wouldn't believe it, because that seemed to be impossible that anyone would make such a film. So it was very nice sort of being introduced to, if you like, the skeptic community.
Did you travel to Africa too to do that filming?
Yes, travel too.
Because that was really powerful stuff, I thought, where you went to the African clinic and they were trying to power it by solar panels, and they could either have their fridge on or they could have the lights on, but not both. That was great stuff.
I think, actually, it's finally coming home, certainly in the UK and around the world, that this decades of promoting ridiculously bad forms of electrical energy production, the chickens are coming home to roost. We're now suffering in the way that actually Africa has suffered, and places like that, from the insistence of international organizations that they just pursue silly green energy policies rather than sensible ones.
Absolutely. I also wanted to ask, did you have a big film crew, and who did the narration, or was it mostly you that behind this whole thing?
It was my gorgeous voice was a narration. And yeah, it was. And the crew, not a huge crew. I normally go away with an assistant producer and a cameraman and a sound man. It's the normal size. So it's not a huge thing, which is why I can keep them quite cheap.
Interesting. And how long did it take from when you started until the thing was wrapped up?
I think maybe 4 months, something like that.
It's amazing to hear how you did it so fast. And then let's talk about, you're thinking of maybe doing an update.
Yeah, I have to get round to, I think, crowdfunding it. I'll have to do, or ask some organizations whether they want to chip in, because I think that, I will go to broadcasters and pitch it to broadcasters and see if they'll take it. The disadvantage of that is, A, broadcasters are usually very reluctant to do this kind of thing. A, because they don't like the kickback, and B, because they're usually staffed by people who are very firmly in the global warming camp. But also the difficulty with doing it for a broadcaster is they will then become involved and they will have a say in the editorial line. And that's harder. But I think I will give that a go.
Okay. And how would this work then? If it was crowdfunded and you produced it, then how would you get it on TV? Or would it just go directly to YouTube or Rumble or someplace where it wouldn't get banned?
I think my aim would be to give it away for free. Because if you ask people to pay for it, then people who are a bit, they're not going to pay for it. It's not as if we've got Kim Kardashian and whoever the celebrity would be. Dick Lindzen is very gorgeous in lots of ways. I'm not sure people will necessarily pay $7 to see him, sort of. So I think my aim would be to give it away for free, trying to spread the word.
Would the new version then be just an updated version of the old one, where you would go around again and talk to scientists and get their latest views and put those up, or any other changes you would make in terms of the way it would look?
I think I'd do it slightly differently. I think the science is even more extraordinary now. I think that really the accumulated work of very clever, dedicated skeptics since then is so impressive. This is such nonsense, the science. It really, all this climate catastrophe stuff is so ridiculous. So certainly the science needs updating. But I think beyond that, the thing that struck me since I made that film was what it was behind it. What keeps the ridiculous bandwagon going, given that the science doesn't stand up? And also, you know what it's like. You go to someone and you say, look, this is all rubbish, this climate crap. And people say, but what about all the scientists? How come all those scientists? So the question is really then the consensus. What's the nature of this consensus? Because it's not the science that keeps the damn thing on the road. The science is laughably, how many models have they created? How few of them have tallied with reality? It is absurd, the degree to which this theory has fallen over so many times, so comprehensively, and yet it's still there in the ether. So that's the question, I think. What's the nature of this consensus that keeps us on the go? Why do so many people who are, described as scientists are backing this? And why is the nature of the political funding machine that drives it? That's what really interests me.
Okay, so this whole idea of you doing an update, I'm bubbling over with enthusiasm. It really makes me happy, considering the job you already did in 2007. I love the idea of you updating it and doing it again. So
well, Tom,
I hope it happens.
After this, let's talk about how to make it happen.
Yeah, I really hope it happens. I mean, are you poised that you could do this in the next year if you had funding?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I've given up my old job in December, so I've been writing a book since then. And the difficulty with writing a book is you're just sat there surrounded by all this
Oh,
nonsense the whole time, and you get sort of itchy to get out and make stuff. So this would be a great relief to get out and make a film. So yeah, eager to do it.
well, hopefully this will happen. Let's see. What else should we talk about here?
I suppose the nature of the consensus, actually, we could
Yes.
chat, because that's the thing that's sort of interesting me most. What's the thing that drove this? And apart from, there's the obvious stuff of funding. There's such a funding bandwagon now that obviously there are a lot of vested interests who are thinking there are so many research projects with global warming connected to it that there's an incentive there. But I don't think that really fully explains the venom and the spread of the support of this for a theory. So I think that now it's obvious to me that this is anti-capitalism. This is a label that the banner under which anti-capitalism marches. So that's, I think, really the interesting area of investigation.
I enjoy watching on Twitter because there's a lot of people on Twitter that straight up say they're against capitalism. They're saying the quiet part out loud. They're admitting that they're anti-capitalist. I'm glad that somebody's admitting that's what's going on here. Yeah.
It's totally obvious. All the people who would normally be anti-capitalist I mean, I remember way back when there was a climate rally in London, and all the people turning up to this climate rally, and it was the wickedness of capitalism, and they were going to march on the city of London, the financial center, and all this kind of thing. It's as plain as day. And so the question is the nature of that anti-capitalist movement, because it's not anti-capitalism in the sense that it used to be used. In the olden days, red anti-capitalism was all about the workers, about that capitalism has done down the workers, and therefore we're fighting on their behalf in order to get them, and so on. But there was obviously a problem insofar as capitalism didn't do down the workers. Capitalism has been very good for the workers. Workers have grown enormously wealthier under capitalism. The capitalist countries are where people want to be. That's where people are trying to migrate to. They're not trying to leave Florida on rafts in order to get to Cuba. People want to get there. And capitalism delivered in a way that the old socialists sort of rather resentfully now kind of give them cars and TVs and sneakers and shopping malls and all this kind of thing. And the Soviet Union and socialism didn't do. And ordinary people know this, which is why socialist movements in the UK, because I used to be far left as a youth, like so many of us, and you'd be selling the ridiculous Marxist papers, and no working class person would want to buy one of these things. They were all middle class students or upper middle class students who used middle class differently in America. But there were sort of posh students who would buy this. And sure enough, when you go to the climate rallies, the anti-capitalist climate rallies in London, there are no working class people there. You don't find any bricklayers or dock workers or crane drivers or anyone like that. You find students carrying copies of Byron and junior lecturers and people like that. So there's a particular kind of anti-capitalism, there's green anti-capitalism, and it's in fact quite anti-working class. They're pissed off. They hate mass production. And of course, mass production goes with mass consumption. They loathe mass consumption. They don't like Nike and all these places that actually sell rather affordable goods for ordinary people. They hate mass tourism. They hate sort of working class people going to exotic places and sort of lying around on the beach showing their tattoos off. And they'd rather restrict that. They think things aren't expensive enough. They think energy isn't expensive enough. They think food isn't expensive enough. They hate the trashy kind of food and culture that working class people enter. It's an anti-working class movement. They want working class people to travel less, they make cars more expensive, and so on and so forth. So it's a very different kind of. It's quite interesting looking at the nature of their anti-capitalism, because it's very snobby and in favor of privileged groups.
It puzzles me that the politicians seem to be so into the climate scam, given the fact that the working classes are not, right? I don't understand why they wouldn't express some skepticism, given that the ordinary people, I don't think they're behaving as if they believe in the climate scam.
I think that it testifies, and just to add to that, it's interesting in the UK that when the Greens actually stand for election, they only managed to get one MP, Caroline Lucas in Brighton. That's from 680, however many MPs we've got. They can manage to get one elected. But green policies rule the roost over all the political parties. The political parties are sort of, and I think that the difficulty is what we're dealing with is an extraordinary, and this is the subject of my book, a kind of secret class an entire social class that we haven't really defined properly, but exists and in fact is, I think, can more or less be defined as the ruling class. And it hasn't got a name, although some people in the past have called it the new class. Not many people use the term new class. Or have you come across the word new class?
I have not. No, I don't know if you mean if we say elites over here. I have not heard new class, but
no, it's
elites,
it's hardly anyone has. I enjoy asking people because everyone says, no, what the hell's that? But it was used by a Yugoslav, a dissident whose name for the moment escapes me, just a couple of others, but very rarely, to describe the class that arose off the back of the expansion of the state. So particularly with the two world wars, you saw an enormous expansion of state control over education, over science, over the arts, an enormous expansion of the state. And an entire class was created there, university educated, that identified itself with the state, thought of it, was brought into being indirectly by the expansion of state regulation. Its wages were coming directly or indirectly from the state. So it thought the state was a good thing, state regulation was a good thing, higher taxes were a good thing. And this is, if you like, the class that dominates the civil service, dominates the media, dominates the universities, dominates teaching, dominates publicly funded science. And for it, capitalism is a wicked thing, not really because it does down the workers, but because it needs to be controlled by them. It needs to be regulated by them. It needs to be taxed by them. So I think that is the monster that we're dealing with. And if you're a politician, you're trying to please the guys in the media, you're surrounded by the civil service because those are the people who you're actually working with. You don't want to piss off the experts, the university experts, and so all those sorts of people. And science, of course, rather grandly puts on a tie and says, science, you must obey us because we are the rational ones. So they're kind of surrounded by this enormously powerful class, which hasn't been elected as such, and doesn't have power that the market has given it, because it's not, almost invariably, these people don't have any kind of marketable skills. If you've got a degree in sociology, you try and get a proper job, you might wake up early on a Saturday morning, desperately need a plumber, but you will never wake up on a Saturday morning desperately needing a sociologist. Those skills are to do with the state and the third sector and the public sector. And those are the guys really we're talking about, who are the kind of, that class has embraced global warming, because global warming demands government intervention. It demands that there are more climate liaison officers in local governments, and there are more people inspecting your recycling bins, and there are more people doing this, that, the other. It's a dream for everyone who wants more analysis, more research, more oversight, more regulation.
Okay, so how do we fight this class of people?
I think the main thing, part of the reason why I want to do the book is we need to identify them. We need to give them a name, and we need to say that is the problem. When the new class wants more public funding for whatever it is, what they like to say is it's for everyone's benefit. When they want more public funding for the opera, it's because we will all benefit from the opera, not just the people who actually go there. Not just them. It's for everyone's good. Hegel called it the universal class, the bureaucratic administrative elite. They've got a claim to be operating in everyone's interest. If they're seen to be operating in their own interests, have actually sort of selfish motivations there, that's a real problem for them. Because then we can say, well, you would say this, wouldn't you? Because this is what you're doing. So I think we've got to identify who they are more specifically and identify their motives and then sort of attack those. I don't think you're ever going to persuade one of these members of the new class you can persuade one or two, but by and large, they are unpersuadable. So when we go to climate alarmists, and lay out the evidence in front of them, forget it. They don't want to know. Right. They just regard you as an absolute enemy. You are the enemy. That is right. So I think in a way, I'm less inclined to sort of try and talk to those people, and I'm more inclined to talk to ordinary people and sow the seeds of discontent there and say, look, do you know what? They're really just trying to screw you.
Yeah, I do agree, or I do realize that ordinary people can be persuaded, because I myself believed in the climate scam at one point, and then I started looking at the evidence. Anthony Watts believed in it. Tony Heller believed in it. So people can switch. I don't know. Did you ever believe in the climate scam at any point in your life, or were you skeptical from the get-go?
Do you know, even though I hadn't really looked into it, I've always been skeptical of the environmentalists. All this back to nature codswallop. It's just nonsense. And all this stuff about how society used to be so much grander before capitalism came along. Really? I mean, maybe because I'd studied ancient and medieval history, I knew that's just absolute nonsense. You know, before capitalism, we had serfdom and slavery and grinding poverty and lack of freedom and lack of imagination, all this. Capitalism is this fantastic thing that has come along and liberated us and made us wealthy to a degree that was previously utterly unimaginable. Capitalism is this freaking miracle. And yet these people who are usually among the wealthier people benefiting from all this are saying, oh, terrible, wicked, fucking capitalism. You know, I mean, just that always struck me as ridiculous. And also it struck me that it was coming from the upper classes. It's no accident that, I mean, when I was making the thing, I was looking at the leaders of the Green movement in the UK. Half of them were aristocrats. You know, there was Baron Peter Melchett and Baron this, and they all come from Eton, and they're all, and there's King Charles, Prince Charles as well. You know, I was thinking, these are these complete knobs complaining about capitalism. And so I realized that there is a kind of posh anti-capitalism that is upset with capitalism, not because it's made workers poorer, but because it's made ordinary people much richer. And actually that's the kind of thing that's really niggling them. And you can see with the discontent of a lot of sort of academics. Once upon a time in the 19th century, if you were a professor, you were the big guy in the big house on the hill, and you had a maid and maybe a chauffeur, and you were the professor. And now plumbers earn more than professors. And so they're pissed off. They're thinking the world is not done. The market is a cruel thing that doesn't appreciate true worth. That's the real grumble here. So I was always a bit skeptical of environmentalism in general. So it wasn't really a great surprise when I think I first read Calder's book on the sun. Nigel Calder, wonderful, lovely man. He used to be editor of New Scientist magazine, who's died sadly. But you know, then it was so obvious from the get-go there was something fishy here.
Okay. Did you say you're writing a book about the new class?
Yes.
Okay. And I would love to read that. And have you written up anything shorter, anything on the internet yet, just to define the new class? I think this would be good to get that definition out there if you have it.
No, I haven't, but I should. I should write something brief, a teaser for the book, and put it out there, because that's the problem. That is the problem. It is a specific social group, and they do not define themselves and cannot define themselves as a class, because that would be perilous to them, because then they've got a specific set of class interests. And they have to stop pretending that they're in it for all of us.
For American audiences, can you talk a little bit about what is the deal with Channel 4 versus the BBC? Channel 4 is publicly funded, nothing to do with the BBC.
It's a public broadcaster in the sense that it was established by government. It's slightly quirky because it was established under Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher sort of wrote into its constitution that it had to be countercultural and go against the grain. She did it because she didn't want it to be producing its own programs, but would rather commission independence. And so she was wanting to bring into being an independent sector of TV producers who weren't working just for the state. And it sort of worked, because I set one of those companies up myself. And Channel 4 was meant to be going against the grain. And I mean, it doesn't very often, but it does sometimes. And there were a couple of really great commissioning editors back in the day, a woman called Sarah Ramsden and Hamish Makura and a few others, but that had the guts to, and Sarah Ramsden was head of science. And again, this is a load of old nonsense. So luckily and she asked me to make the series Against Nature, which was the first attack on environmentalism that I did. And we did one on GM food as well, saying that the scare around GM crops was ridiculous.
Okay.
So they're different from the BBC. I don't think the BBC would ever in a million years and people at the BBC have said they would never ever allow such a film to appear on the BBC.
Would Channel 4 allow anything nowadays versus 2007? Were they much more likely to allow something like this?
I think they might. There are a couple of good guys there, I think. So I must appeal to their better selves and try and get something away. It's rare. It's very rare. For the most part, the media is full of people who are university educated, who regard themselves as vaguely connected with the intelligentsia. And the intelligentsia is precisely at the heart of that new class we were talking about. And so it's kind of being part of a club. As I'm sure you know, if you go along to a dinner party and you're a global warming skeptic, it can cause a bit of trouble. It was the equivalent in the UK recently of wanting Brexit, of wanting Britain to leave the European Union. If you go to a nice upper middle class dinner party in North London, and where there are lots of lecturers and lawyers and that sort of thing, and you say that you want to leave the European Union, you're in favour of Brexit, or you think global warming's a load of rubbish, or you think actually Trump might be a good thing, or something like that, you've caused real social offence. It's a cultural taboo to do something like that.
Do you have the feeling that there are quite a few people who don't believe in the climate scam, but they just keep it to themselves?
Yeah.
There's a lot of that? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of that. And it was the same with Brexit. A lot of people were in favour of Brexit, but didn't want to poke their head above because they're quite articulate and confident and noisy and bullying and hectoring the other side. So you've got to have real sort of nerves of steel to stand up against them. And if you're just an ordinary Joe going about your ordinary business, you don't necessarily want to be reviled and attacked and abused. You've got to be some maniac like you or me.
So about people in the BBC, for example, that are constantly pushing the climate scam, do you think they sincerely believe it, or even them? They have their private doubts, but they're still pushing it in public. I have a hard time understanding what's happening.
I think there might be a few individuals who have private doubts, but not so much that they're prepared to go on a limb, because you risk your career. There was one Channel 4 commissioning editor who I know lost out on a job at the BBC because they'd sailed too close to the wind on this. It can affect your career. So I think people are scared.
Okay. What do you think about the possible blackouts coming this winter in the UK, or a lack of natural gas? Do you think that is going to swing people more towards reality in terms of fossil energy versus trying to prevent bad weather with wind and solar power?
Well, I mean, one would hope so, but the difficulty is the nuclears, to come back to my favorite topic, are enormously powerful in their control of the media and on that level of opinion. So as a result of we've got threatened blackouts over here and all that kind of thing, because we've got ridiculous windmills and solar panels instead of proper sources of electrical generation. And yet you still have the Labour Party, for example, saying, well, this just goes to show we need to push ahead with more subsidies for renewable energy and pull forward our deadline for going carbon neutral to the. I mean, you just think, this is a madness. There's a surreal madness to all this. But pricking it's hard because one doesn't have control, especially in Britain, the BBC. I mean, the BBC is a great problem, I think, in all this, because the BBC controls about 70% of news coverage broadcasting on TV and radio in the UK is controlled by the BBC, and the BBC is very firmly green. So it's hard getting the message through. But as you say, I mean, people are going to start suffering so much that our job is to try and explain precisely why that's happening. It's ridiculous. The beginning of the 21st century, blackouts, and we haven't got enough energy supply. I mean, this is because these experts, these scientific experts, these absurd Luddites have been taking an axe to the energy sector.
Yeah, it is amazing. What do you think the ordinary people are thinking about the Just Stop Oil people, or people gluing themselves to various objects and smashing up the gas stations or whatever? How's that going over with ordinary people?
I think all of those people are reviled as tossers. They're just, I mean, all the Extinction Rebellion lot, I think they're held in utter contempt by normal people. Absolutely utter contempt. And actually, interestingly, in the TV industry as well, broadcasters learned that whenever they put on environmental programming, ratings absolutely nosedive. No one wants to watch them. When they're watching the Richard Attenborough nature shows, they're not watching those because Richard Attenborough's grinding on about overpopulation. They're watching them because they want to see lions and sharks and fish and things like that. So they want looking at those for the pictures, not the ridiculous kind of green message that Attenborough's putting out. For ordinary programming, if you put on Greta Thunberg on a documentary, ratings are going to go through the floor. People want to watch Top Gear, and they want to watch car makeover shows, and they want to watch stuff like that. And they are not. The Extinction Rebellion is a preoccupation of upper middle class, privileged university students. And I think they're generally held in contempt by ordinary people. There was a lovely time when incident about a year ago, maybe more, where some of these green protesters got onto a tube train, an underground train. Everyone's trying to go to work in the morning. Protesters get on to say, it's terrible. We're using all the energy on the trains to go to work, and it's all bad. And they're on top of the train. Ordinary folk are down there trying to get to work. It must have been before COVID. But they're going, they're so annoyed to clamber up. grab these protesters, yank them off the train, and you don't see precisely what happens in the background as they're presumably duffed up a bit and then pushed out. But they're absolutely reviled. These people who sit in the middle of the road, oh my God, the fury. Where I live, the local council had put in low traffic neighbor LTNs, things to stop cars going. You can't go along that road, you can't go along, all these sort of things to stop people driving around. Ordinary people are fucking furious, absolutely furious. There was a demonstration along Upper Street in Islington about these things, and I went on the demo. And I thought, because back in the day when I was a lefty, I was on loads of demos, but you'd be on loads of demos with young other lefty students with copies of Byron in their pocket. But on this occasion, I was thinking, my God, for the first time in my life, I'm in a genuinely working class demonstration.
Nice.
These people were cab drivers and lorry drivers, and they were furious because they drive cars. I look out my window and I see who are on the bicycles. They're all upper middle class wankers on driving the bikes. Real working class people are doing real jobs in cars, or they're in cars and they like cars as well. So anyway, I'm on this absolutely proper working class demonstration against all the green barriers and things to us driving around town. And along the side, I see the occasionally Extinction Rebellion type trust fund, jeans wearing kind of tosser. And I was thinking, is there going to be any trouble? Because they're a bit, these the net zero activists and things, they can be pretty kind of but no, they were not going anywhere near this solidly working class demo because they knew they'd get their heads kicked in. And it was a joy to be on and a joy to behold that when an Extinction Rebellion radical with their pink hair and the rest of it actually up close to one of the working class people whose interests they are dumping all over, they're scared. They don't want to take that on because they're fine when they're sticking themselves by glue to a cop car with one of their friends filming it so the police can't do anything. But actually, in a real life situation, and those are the people on that march. Those are our people. Those are the people that we're fighting for. The people who who can't afford to pay ridiculously huge their energy bills, who actually want an affordable car because they want to drive their gran to the hospital and that sort of thing. And you want a car for all the reasons we need cars, and who want to take foreign holidays, who don't see why only rich people should go on foreign holidays. Those are the people, as far as I'm concerned, who we're fighting for. And that's why we've got to keep going, because actually it's in the best interests of the vast majority of ordinary working people in Canada and the US and the UK and in Africa that this matters. And ultimately, they're on our side. And that's why I think ultimately we must win.
That's great stuff. And given the fact that the vast majority of people are on our side, isn't there room for politicians in the UK, for example, to just give some straight talk and say that fossil fuels are good and we don't believe in the climate scam? Isn't there room to do that?
Well, I think it almost needs a character like Nigel Farage or a Trump character. The reason why I think Trump is so utterly reviled is because he was prepared to do that. I mean, what politician is prepared to stand up and say, you've got to accept the kind of crap that came Trump's way? And I'm not saying Trump is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and indeed none of us are. But nevertheless, there are imperfect politicians on the other side as well, but they don't get the same venom that Trump attracts. And I think it's partly because to be the kind of character who's prepared to stand up and say what we're talking about, you've got to be a bit odd anyway. You've got to be a bit, no normal career politician is going to do that because they think it's going to be potential suicide. In a way, you've got to be really not care. Ideally have private means so that they can't get you that way. So it's very difficult to poke through because that's their layer. That's the power, that level of state control. That's where they dominate. We dominate down here, but it's hard to get above, as you say.
Okay. And then to go back to your answer before, I want to make sure I understand that to fight this new class, a big thing we need to do is give them a name and expose them as the new class, that their interests are not the same as our interests.
What they are using global warming as an excuse to increase regulation and raise taxes. That's what they want. They want a more powerful state, and climate is a particularly good excuse to expand the control of the state, because they are the state. They are
Okay.
the people who have those jobs. They are the regulators. They are the tax consumers.
Okay. And you're including like the UN and the WEF, who they might have dreams of a personal carbon allowances for us, and
Exactly.
central bank
It's
digital currency where they keep track of what we're spending our money on and
like
control
COVID.
us.
They have totalitarian instincts. They have whatever extends the control of the state extends, as far as they're concerned, the force of good, because they are the state. The more control there is over our lives, the happier they are, because they are the controllers. They are the very people who have their hands on those levers. And so it really is a fight between individual freedom and the power of the state. And it just happens to have a climate sticker on.
So that's something we certainly can warn ordinary people about, that we don't want this central bank digital currency where we're being controlled in every aspect of our lives, and we're being told not to go on vacation, all that stuff.
And in a way, now is not a bad time to start articulating those things, because we're seeing the results of money printing over decades and increased government debt over decades. And because what they want to do is they're voracious, they're ravenous. They want to take our money. They want to tax us in various ways. Obviously, direct taxation is one. Racking up government debt is another. Printing money is another. This is just another form of taxation, effectively. And they've been doing it to bursting point. And now inflation is starting to take off. Government debt is so huge. Interest rates are starting to go up, spiral upwards. The wheels are coming off the dreadful kind of Keynesian bandwagon. So now I think is not a bad time to try and sort of explain that to ordinary people. And but it's hard because it's complicated, and we need slogans, and we need to simplify arguments, and we need to distill our arguments. One of the reasons I'm quite keen to make a film is in the process of making a film, you need to actually think, how do I turn this message into the most easily comprehensible, well-defined, hard-hitting thing I can. And that's what we need to do. We need to really refine our arguments. We need to get our slogans, and we need to get out there and shame the other side and expose them to what they really are.
Very good. Do you have any connections or with like GWPF or with CAR 26 or Heartland or any of these other climate skeptic organizations? Or
yeah, I mean, I know some of the guys at Global Warming Policy Foundation, but not many, because it's a long time since I made the film, and so since then I've been doing other stuff. So I need to revive them. So I will. So we must share contacts, Tom. And
I love that idea.
And I'll make you a producer of the film. So
okay, that sounds great. It does sound great. No, this is all makes me happy. All the stuff you're saying here.
And how about you? How has your view of this changed over the years? I mean, how's that developed? There's one thing when you start thinking, this doesn't add up. But now you've been thinking about this for some time now, haven't you?
I have. I'm like 15 or 16 years into it, almost every single day, reading everything I can about it. So I do feel like I've learned quite a bit. Like I say, I believed in it back like 2005 or so. I trusted the scientists, et cetera. But I've gotten just so much more cynical just in the last 2 years, even about what people's motivations are and who can I trust, et cetera. Yeah. So now I feel like I have to independently check about everything that I'm told and to see if it's true or not.
And haven't you noticed that there is a real pattern to what people believe in? If they're real diehard down activists and think we should all be locked down and wear masks over our feet and all that sort of thing, then they're likely to buy into the global warming nonsense. And they're also likely in Britain to be a Remainer, to want to stay in the EU, which is a big nuclear project. These things tend to go together, don't they? And likewise, global warming skeptics are far more likely to be skeptical about lockdown. They're far more likely to be skeptical about money printing. Just even things like that. It's so interesting the way the forces are aligned.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a big part of it is people, I even have some friends who just blindly trust whatever the TV tells them. That's it. If it's on TV, it's true. And they save themselves so much effort by they don't have to fact check anything, or if a CNN says it, it's true, and that's it. They're done. And they've been proven right, et cetera. But I think I'm seeing people are starting to question things more than they were even a couple of years ago. I think people's eyes have been opened more than they were in the past. So I'm encouraged by that.
Well, I think COVID certainly hasn't helped them, because they were banging on so much about all the vaccination and the lockdowns. And now people are thinking, what the hell was all that about? And yet all the experts and scientists were lined up to ram that down our throat mercilessly. And now it seems, oh, you know what? It was all bollocks. So I think people can see, and certainly in the UK as well, we were told if we leave the European Union, it'll be absolutely disastrous. The economy will do that day 2 and we'll all be eating grass. But that was all bollocks. So I think on a lot of these issues, the supposed experts and the government orthodoxy has been shown to be complete codswallop.
Yeah. One phrase that I'm hearing quite a bit in a lot of places is if they lied to us about that, what else are they lying to us about? And
Yeah.
the original lie is not necessarily COVID. It could be something else, but I think people are just starting to question stuff. And for that, I'm very happy.
So you're feeling positive and
I am. I think there's some evil forces out there, but I am optimistic and I do enjoy doing this every day. I love this. I love interviews like this. I'm eating it up. It's great.
good. Well, I think when you're in a war, it's good to enjoy.
Yeah, it is good. Okay, I think it might be a good wrap-up point, unless you have other points you'd like to make here for today.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's been a real treat.
I've enjoyed this a ton. Let's keep in touch, and hopefully you can get that movie updated.
Excellent.
All right, talk to you later.
Cheers. All the
Bye.
best, Tom.